if you don't know who you are, anybody can name you, and if anybody can name you, your answer to anything. And that's an African proverb I start my book with. So that's
Mhm.
the foundation that will propel us moving forward. And as a black person who comes from a history of oppression in this country, it's vitally important that you know who you are, because just like you saw in the video, we could be labeled with the N-word, we could be labeled as criminal, thug, etc. But my history counters that and says, no, that's a lie, that's propaganda. This is what I actually am.
Mhm. It's so true. And I think naming yourself, like claiming who you are and owning that and having a sense of pride in that, regardless of the color of your skin, your ethnicity, or your background, is so powerful,
Yep.
right? And that sense of pride is real. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of that kind of connection with my name, my family's name, and what it means in old English, and how the families have evolved over time. So I absolutely can connect with that sense of knowing who you are. And when my wife and I got married, there was the question of, well, are you going to take each other's names? And I'm like, I'm not changing my name. This is my name. Keep my name. So if you want my name, that's great, but I'm keeping my name because
Right.
it's so much a part of how I identify. So I completely understand what you're saying, and I hope that everyone can and feel that sense of pride in who they are and where they come from. But something else you said really jumped out at me when we think about this woman's actions, that she felt empowered to behave that way and to lash out and attack you because the systems in place have been created specifically to protect people like her
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
vilify people like you.
Right.
And that's what I think people don't understand. And there's all this controversy around privilege, and, well, I'm not privileged, I wasn't born with money, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And I've explained it to other people in my community who I interact with who are white, to say privilege doesn't mean wealth. It can manifest itself in that way, right? When you roll back, and black families were not given mortgages and they weren't allowed to buy homes in certain areas. And like, you can roll back history and look at how privilege does equal wealth,
Mm-hmm.
generational wealth. But in the overall greater context, it's not just about wealth. It's about
Right.
being able to walk down the street and not fear that you'll be arrested or shot
Mm-hmm.
because you're in what's perceived as a white neighborhood or where you don't belong. And I've experienced this when and I shared this with you earlier. I had a foster son for a couple years, very, very tall, over 6 foot tall, very dark skinned, from Jamaica, black young man. And I had to walk him to school and back because he kept getting pulled over by the police, and they would question him as to what he was doing in this neighborhood. They made him open his backpack, and there was nothing but books in there and pencils. But this kept happening over and over again. So as soon as I walked with him, they left him alone. One time, however, they still pulled him over because they were worried about me.
Mm-hmm.
And is
Yeah.
this young man harassing you? And I was like, no, he's my son, we're good.
Yeah.
um, but I've experienced it from that secondary level,
Yeah.
but it still can't feel the same for me as it felt for him or for you. And
Yeah.
so I think that these types of conversations are so powerful and so helpful to allow people to understand what we mean when we say privilege. And
Mm-hmm.
you may have certain types of privileges. You are educated, you have a job, you have a family. Along with that comes certain privileges that other people who don't have an education, don't have the ability to attain employment, those types of things, they don't have those certain privileges. So everybody has it, but just own what you do have and then advocate for others who don't, right? That's
Yep.
kind of the overall message that
Yep.
we want people to understand, and to not like die on that sword of, well, I wasn't born with a spoon in my mouth, because that argument just, it's like, just go away, just stop. We don't need
Yeah.
that. Just stop it.
And I think a lot of people are missing the point of, when you say white privilege, we're just talking about race,
Yeah.
That's like you said, it's not to say that, because white people live in poverty as well. I've seen that before, so it's not like, yeah, we're talking about race, but people, like you said, people can have privileges in other aspects of society and things of that nature. So I think that's just, how people how it's been framed and also how people perceive it.
Hmm. Yeah, and to get so defensive about it, that's the one thing that I
Mhm.
find amazing. A couple, well, what, about 2 years ago, when that term really started to gain some
Yeah,
traction. I grew up in a fairly small town here in the South, and so I connected with different people on Facebook who I went to high school with and grew up with. And I posted something about privilege and what it means, and oh my gosh, they attacked me left and right about it doesn't exist, and you're
yeah.
crazy. Why are you ashamed of being white? And I'm like, I'm not ashamed of being white. That I can be white and be proud of who I am and my
Yeah,
my ancestors and my history,
yeah,
and also
yeah,
understand that privilege exists,
yeah,
and advocate and do what I can to help others in whatever mediums are available to
yeah,
me. So it's not none of it is black and white, right? There's all this gray area that we
yeah,
have to elevate our the way we think and the way we interact to be able to understand it. And unfortunately, like you said, systems have been created and in place that allows people who look like me to not have to do that, right?
yeah,
We don't have to accept that we have privilege because it exists whether we accept it or not.